Some insults don't leave a scar, but they ignite a war no one sees coming. Today's story is about a mother-in-law who was told by her own daughter-in-law that she no longer mattered. Pushed to the margins of her own family, she didn't argue. She fell silent. And then, at one fateful dinner, as her daughter-in-law gloated about her perfect plans, she calmly revealed a secret that would shatter everything and prove that she was impossible to ignore. It all began with a silence and a piece of land. Some words don't cut you. They thin the air and let the cold in. I have learned that on a farm, the things that keep you going aren't dramatic. They're valves and schedules. A bucket washed the night before so it behaves in the morning. A binder with tabs in a handwriting you can read when you're tired. If you've ever checked drip lines in April by headlamp and listened for the soft, even click of water deciding to work with you, you know what I mean. Dignity here is a straight row and a gate that latches. Love is the set of names you keep on your clipboard because phone batteries die. I used to think being ignored would feel like a slammed door. Turns out it can sound like a compliment with the edges filed off. Tradition, legacy, our roots. Words said into a microphone that make a woman who has paid bills with frost on her breath feel like a souvenir. My name is Evelyn Hart. I am 60, a widow, and I run Hart's Lane Market, our blueberry farm and roadside stand in the Fraser Valley, just outside Chilliwack. The farmhouse sits a short walk behind the market, a sensible 2-story with a porch that leans the right way. The farm is in the Agricultural Land Reserve, which is the province's way of saying, this dirt is meant to stay dirt that grows food. I have a water license that's older than my son, a food premises permit from Fraser Health for our small wash and pack area, a GST and a PST number taped inside the office cabinet door, and a stubborn way of keeping records that makes young people call me adorable when they don't mean to be cruel. I wake at 4:30, year-round, because habits protect you from weather. Spring is testing. Before sunrise, the field is a parish of low sounds. The irrigation pump humming, the tiny hiss of emitters, starlings practicing some argument that never ends. I pull on my rubber boots, shrug into the old coat with the torn pocket, and walk the rows with my headlamp. I squeeze a berry that winter left behind and let the skin tell me if the bush will forgive us. I check the drip lines for leaks and listen for the unhelpful enthusiasm of a break. I carry pruning shears and a roll of tape and fix what I can fix without waking a neighbor. I take a Brix reading for the early fruit because numbers tell you what your tongue might flatter. When the light is honest enough to name the color of the soil, I shut the pump, check the meter, and write the usage in my notebook because the water license wants dates, not poetry. By 7, I am back in the wash area, the fluorescent light making the stainless tables look like they always meant to be useful. I test the sanitizer strength, record the temperature of the cooler on a log sheet that calms me more than any guided meditation, and lay out clean crates. At 8, I open the stand, sliding the chalkboard out to the road and writing in my square letters. Blueberries, frozen, eggs, jam, rhubarb. On rainy days, I add, hot coffee in a thermos, be honest. Locals are. Most travelers are. A few teach me to count change with my thumb under the bill. Owen, my son, is 34 and has shoulders that remember old hockey. He is a good worker when his hands are busy and his head is quiet. He moved back after his father died to help with summer harvests and never quite left. He can fix a leaky valve without talking to it and can talk to a neighbor without leaking anger. He married Jade 3 years ago, a woman with sharp eyes and hands that have done more typing than picking, which is not a sin. She runs social media for small businesses and freelances on the side. She sees the farm as a brand, Hart Lane Collective, with a logo that leans and a palette of soft greens and blush. I see it as a mortgage and a row of bushes that need pruning on time. Jade says things like elevate the experience and activate the property. She looks at my hand-lettered sign like a relative you love but wish would not visit on holidays. She proposed a tasting bar for infused beverages, a wedding arch at the end of row 12, and a sunset picnic series. I asked her about permits, insurance, the ALC rules for agritourism. She said she would handle the details and asked if I could Just be the face, our story. I have a face. It belongs to someone who knows the difference between plans and approvals, between a picnic and an event, between a field and a venue. Still, she is my daughter-in-law. I have held her crying, carried her casseroles, and smiled at her long plans the way I used to smile at my son when he built forts out of quilts and thought he'd discovered architecture. The weeks before the insult that changed things were busy with the kind of work that never makes a post. We taped new labels for jars of jam. I balanced the GST return for the quarter and the PST report for the month. I called our insurance broker to add a young worker to the schedule because I do not like the way risk looks when it meets a teenager. And I reprinted the U-Pick rules for the summer with the new hours mandated under our permit. I cleaned the small hand-washing sink and changed the soap cartridge because Fraser Health likes to see fresh, and frankly, so do I. I set up the on-farm scale, calibrated it with the little weight we've had since 1998, and placed the pad of triplicate receipts beside it because carbon copies reassure me that the day will behave. Jade had been busy too, though not with the same kind of hours. She hired a stylist to refresh the stand, which is the marketing word for putting someone else's taste over your life. She ordered a fog machine that, she said, would add ambiance to evening events, the sort of sentence I would have found funny if the charge hadn't shown up on my supplementary card. She booked 2 content creators to visit on a Friday and comped them U-Pick slots and a tasting board in exchange for exposure. Exposure is a word that on farms means sunburn, and in the cities sometimes means something money avoids. We did not fight, not then. I tidy instead of attacking. When I found Jade's emails to a beverage sponsor promising exclusive access to the field and use of our images across their channels, I moved the image files into a folder labeled Hours and wrote her a note on the calendar. Confirm consent and insurance before sharing our farm photos. She ignored the note and posted a reel of the morning fog in the East Block. It was pretty. It made the field look like a veil. The phone vibrated into exhaustion with hearts and comments from people who like to love without buying. The soft launch came on a Saturday that opened like a bruise, purple at the horizon, brightening slowly, as if light had to negotiate. Jade had sent invitations to friends of the farm and hung a temporary banner that read Heart Lane Collective in a lean, elegant font. She draped it over the old wooden sign my husband and I carved the year Owen lost his first tooth. She set out stemless glasses. She put on lipstick for the camera. Neighbors came. My friend Rita from 2 farms over brought bread and a wary expression. A young couple from Vancouver arrived in linen like a dare. A woman from a wedding planning company measured the distance from the stand to the end of the row with her eye and nodded like a person approving of a hallway she doesn't own. I wore my hat and my good shirt and stood by the scale, weighing honesty with a smile. When it was time, Jade stepped onto a crate, held a microphone as if it had been grown for her, and began to talk. She thanked everyone for coming to celebrate a new chapter. She spoke about tradition and innovation as if they had gotten divorced, and she alone could coax them into sharing custody. She announced a rebrand, Heart Lane Collective. She said she would be leading the brand. She called me our heritage. She gestured toward me. Someone's grandmother in a blouse, like a museum piece you pat on your way to the gift shop. She said, founded by Jade, 2025, and the slide she had propped against a crate showed those words in a line that barely acknowledged the rest of us. People clapped because they are not impolite. Rita looked at me in that sideways way some friends have, the one that lets privacy breathe while solidarity has its say. Owen stood near the fog machine as if it could blow cover over his quiet. He clapped with his hands and not his eyes. You don't get to pick your humiliations, not out here. They arrive wearing the face of a family member and the shoes of a person who thinks the earth wants to be curated. I went back behind the counter, poured coffee for the 2 seniors who'd driven in early and didn't plan to stand for a speech they couldn't hear anyway, and counted my breaths. Jade kept talking. She announced Sunset Tastings, a wedding showcase, a sponsorship plan. She said, activate the field twice. She did not say water license or agricultural land reserve or Fraser Health or insurance. Those words don't flatter. I smiled. I cut samples of shortbread and placed them on a plate. I checked the sanitizer bucket, even though I had checked it an hour ago. I emptied the garbage and replaced the bag with the sharp snap that tells you it's going to stay. I stopped my hands from shaking by picking up a pen and writing the date on a receipt pad that did not need a date. I stood very still for a minute and pictured my husband, Bill, flushed from a day's work and gleeful because a new chain on the mower made it ride like a hymn. I heard him in my head, his plain, careful voice. "Eve, do the next right thing." I picked up my coffee and did. After the speeches and the picture-taking and the compliments that bruise with sugar, I found that Jade had changed the U-Pick hours on the website to include evenings and had listed wedding rehearsal photo ops as an optional add-on. I checked the ALC rules on my shelf where I keep the things that stand between us and regret. Weddings are not agritourism, not by the book, not on ALR land unless you go through processes we had not even begun to greet. I printed the page and held it in my hand like a rock with a story. I also found charges on my supplementary card. The fog machine, a handcrafted arch from a woman in Abbotsford who builds things that look like they would collapse if a child breathed on them. 2 crates of stemless glasses, a deposit on a pop-up bar. I ran my thumb along the little numbers to feel whether they hid. They did not. Numbers are too honest for shame. That night, after the last car had sprayed gravel and the last compliment had been filed by the air under a name it did not ask to hold, I went into the small office at the back of the wash area. It is not grand. Cinder block wall. The swayback metal cabinet that Bill refused to replace because it was still useful. A desk we bought from a closing beauty salon and gave dignity with work. I closed the door. The silence there is useful. It sounds like a field sleeping. I opened the bottom drawer of the cabinet and pulled out the folders that make a life hold. The property title with my name and the words, Agricultural Land Reserve, stamped across the plan. The water license notice with its date and meter number. The farm liability insurance policy with events mentioned in a section someone had warned me about and I had underlined. The Fraser Health permit on its 812X11 with the inspector's neat initials, the business registration, the GST and PST accounts, the payroll records for the 3 summer kids we rehire like a ritual, the contract with the small grocery that takes our berries every Thursday, the list of names of people who owe us a favor and who I have fed soup. I also pulled the framed photo of the stand the day we painted the name on a plank of cedar. Bill holding a brush like a weapon against indignity, me smiling like a person who didn't know from then how grief trains the hands. I set it on the desk and let it lean. I am not sentimental about much. I am faithful about enough. I made a new folder. It was red because that's what the stationery store had and because color helps when a room is behaving like a mood. I printed from Jade's email the thing I could not forgive. Founded by Jade. I printed her sponsorship deck pages where she had pasted photos of our rows and our stand with a script font under them, promising exclusive access and premium content opportunities. Under the photo, she had written, "We can guarantee late light sessions." She cannot guarantee light. She cannot guarantee the weather, the water, the willingness of the ALC to be charmed by a font. I labeled the red folder with the label maker that Jade bought for spice jars, and I use for obligations. Facts, not feelings. Into it, I slid the title, the water license, the insurance, the permit, the account registrations, the ALC printout, and a copy of the U-Pick rules we had posted last summer. I added a photocopy of the check stub I wrote to the food bank in 2020 when we harvested more than we could sell safely and decided the right way to count was in meals. I added the thank you letter from the food bank's manager, the one that makes my eyes sting in a good way. I added a letter from our neighbor whose fence we repaired for cost, not because she asked, because fences are community. The next morning, I checked the drip lines and felt better for doing something that can't be argued with. Then I checked the bookings calendar and found that Jade had slotted in a wedding showcase 3 weeks from Saturday. She'd attached a list of partners: a beverage company, the wedding planner, the florist who sometimes buys our stems when she needs a straight, honest green in her arrangements, and a photographer with a drone license he likes to mention before you ask. Owen was at the corner of the packing table assembling flats. He is quicker with silence than with talk. "Did you see this?" I asked. I held up the printout. He glanced, rubbed the back of his neck, and said, "It'll bring people." "It will bring inspectors," I said, not unkind, "and sponsors and insurance and questions about names that have to match on paper before they go on banners." He shrugged a shrug I recognized from when he was 13 and thought chores were a form of persecution. He said, "Jade has a plan." "So do I said. He looked at me properly then, and whatever he saw in my face made him put the flat down slowly. Jade came in later with that glow people get when they've made a spreadsheet that pleased them. She talked about styled shoots, about tagged brands, about how we would be booked out for summer. I asked for the contracts. She said they were in process. I asked to see the insurance certificates. She said the sponsors would share assets. I asked if she had checked ALR rules. She said, "Mum, it's 2025. I said, "It's still the ALR." There is a heat that arrives in the chest of a woman who has placed her name on documents for 30 years and been told gently that names don't matter when a new idea snaps its fingers. I held it like you hold a kettle that's hotter than you expected, not for punishment, but so you remember that flesh needs keeping. I did not raise my voice. Raised voices terrify blueberries. I told Jade I loved her ability to see pictures. I told her I would be checking the words underneath those pictures, the permits, the policies, the clauses. She rolled her eyes gently and kissed my cheek out of habit. That habit is worth more than any sponsorship, and I keep it with care. That night, I opened the ledger. I wrote down what I had paid for out of my own pocket in the last 5 years: the upgrade to the drip system after the drought, the replacement for the old tractor battery on a Sunday when the parts store was closed and a neighbor drove 3 towns over to get one from his cousin, the roofing repair on the pack house after the wind decided we needed to meet the sky more intimately, the time I bought proper gloves for the kids because teenagers won't buy what they need if the color doesn't flatter them. I wrote down hours. I wrote down names. I wrote down dates. I did not write down feelings. Feelings know the way to my bed and will find me without help. I printed a list of our registrations and licenses and wrote a note beside each where Jade's plan intersected. ALCs, weddings not permitted as agritourism, Fraser Health, tastings require specific setup, insurance, events require my sign-off. Business registration. Name must match on signs if we hope to renew anything without a fuss. I reminded myself that governance is how love keeps its hands clean. If Owen and Jade wanted a brand, they could start by learning to pay the bottle deposit and file a permit application that spells its own name. Right. Nothing hero happens in a night. The farm keeps you humble by requiring the same kind of actions in the morning that you did yesterday if you want to say you run a farm at all. I woke up, boiled water, tested the sanitizer, checked the cooler temperature, and wrote it down because numbers behave only if you behave first. I packed eggs and wrote each tray's count and initials like a chant. I opened the stand. A neighbor paid me for 2 flats with a roll of loonies and the apology of a woman whose bank machine offered her that in grief. I shut the fog machine off at its plug because things that fog your field should be invited by the sky. Jade posted a countdown to the wedding showcase. I posted the you-pick hours and the safety rules. I do not believe posting is the same as planning, but I am not foolish enough to ignore people where they gather. People came into the stand asking about sunset sessions. I sold them frozen berries and told them about the way sunlight on a July evening here can make you believe you were born to stand between rows and breathe. The truth doesn't need a flyer. It does need a ledger. That evening, I put the red folder by the door next to my boots. It was thicker and steadier. I touched the tab with the rough pad of my thumb and felt the little raised letters, facts, not feelings, like a promise I could keep without becoming someone I would not want to know. You might expect me to say I slept well. I did not. I slept like a woman who hears a pump in her dreams and listens for the wrong hum. But when morning came, it found me as it always finds me, upright, dressed, hands empty, and ready for useful weight. There will be letters next. There will be quiet visits to offices where the chairs are old and the people behind them have learned not to be charmed by adjectives. There will be the careful phrasing of a woman who would rather prune a row than prune an ego, but knows how to do both if the harvest depends on it. There will be a calendar entry for a date other people are calling a showcase, and I am calling an appointment with consequences. There will be a table, and on that table there will be papers, and beside those papers there will be coffee, and there will be a small, sharp truth. I am not a figurehead. I am the name on the title and the permit and the accounts. If Jade wants to be believed when she speaks into a microphone, she can stand next to me while I sign, learn what the letters cost, and lift a crate. Before any of that, though, the field wants weeded, the bin wants washed, and the road wants a sign that tells the truth about what we sell. I can do those things without anybody's applause. That's what I'll be doing tomorrow when the sun climbs over the poplars and finds me where I've always been, at the edge of a row, making myself impossible to ignore by keeping a place alive. Some reckonings don't arrive as showdowns. They show up as phone trees, as plastic sleeves with labels that make your hands calm, as a clerk who knows your first name because you paid your taxes when paying didn't feel glamorous. Where I live, winter teaches you to fight with preparation. You stack wood before you're cold. You fix the latch in September. You keep people's cell numbers printed, not just held in a battery that decides its own moods. After Jade called me our heritage into a microphone built for applause, I did the only dramatic thing I trust. I sharpened a pencil. Then I got in the truck. I started where paper grows a backbone, the bank. The branch has the kind of linoleum that forgives boots. Behind the counter, the manager, Gurpreet, waved me into his little office with the plant and the photo of his daughter holding a fish that didn't understand it was teaching a man about pride. He poured me water like we were going to say hard things gently. I slid my ID in the red folder across the desk. 2 requests, I said. Implement dual signatures on outgoing transfers and e-transfers above $500 from the farm account, and withdraw the supplementary card's authority for any vendor category not listed as farm operations. He didn't argue. He pulled up the profile, confirmed the accounts, printed the authorization form, and pointed to the lines. "We'll need your signature here and here," he said, "and a note in the profile. Owner approval required to add any new users." I added a 3rd request because I like to finish what fear starts. "New login credentials," I said, with fresh security questions that don't include information my daughter-in-law knows. He exhaled through his nose in that way bankers do when a story is obvious without being told. "We'll text you when the changes are active," he said. "Not text," I said, smiling. "Call and email, and I want a paper letter." He chuckled, printed the confirmation, and handed me copies for the folder. The red tab made a little sound as it settled. Paper satisfying itself inside plastic. From there, I drove to the insurance office. The broker, a woman named Denise with hair that refused fashion and a memory for exclusions, met me in a cubicle that smelled faintly of toner and winter coats. "Talk me through operations," she said, reaching for a pen that had done this before. I described the stand, the wash, pack area, the U-pick, the occasional school tour, and then the new proposals, tastings, a wedding showcase, an outdoor bar. "Our policy covers farm liability, products, and limited agri-tourism," she said, tapping the clause. "But weddings and alcohol service ask for their own endorsements, certificates from vendors, and your explicit sign-off as named insured." She printed an email template addressed to the beverage sponsor and wedding planner, requiring proof of insurance, additional insured wording naming me and the farm, and a site-specific safety plan. "If you don't sign those," she added, "we can't extend coverage. If they go ahead anyway, coverage doesn't exist. Not maybe. Doesn't." I left with a template, an updated declarations page that listed me the way my father would have liked to see my name, and a little lift at the back of the lungs that comes from a clause standing where a person used to be alone. The Fraser Health office was next. The waiting area had those chairs that promise nothing and deliver exactly that. The inspector, Marla, half my age and twice my patience for forms, listened as I outlined the tasting idea and the pop-up bar. She asked to see our last inspection and our sanitizer logs. I held up the red folder like a baby to be weighed and handed her the sheets. "You're tidy," she said, and I let the compliment land where fatigue lives. We booked a routine inspection for the Thursday before Jade's wedding showcase. Marla reminded me that any sampling must happen in a designated area, with hand wash access, allergen signage, and utensils stored, so that no one who has ever said the word charcuterie would be offended. "And alcohol?" I asked. "That's not me," she said, "but if it's being served, we'll want to see it sealed and handled per rules. No open bar out of a Rubbermaid cooler." I laughed in a way that suggested I could have cried in a different room. She printed the appointment confirmation and a pamphlet with the sort of cheerful clip art that keeps a woman from forgetting which sink does which job. On my way home, I pulled into a turnout and called the Agricultural Land Commission's inquiry line. A patient man with the voice of someone who has explained the same rule to 100 hopeful couples said, "Weddings are not an allowable agritourism use in the ALR unless permitted by a non-farm use application. Photography can be incidental, but events with seating, sound equipment, bars, no." I thanked him and wrote the words in capital letters in my notebook. Capitals were the kindness I could give myself when a room wouldn't. Back at the farm, I made tea, then forgot to drink it. I sat in the small office, opened the red folder, and made sections like a person laying fence: bank, insurance, health, ALC, suppliers, communications. I added the bank forms we'd signed, the updated insurance declarations, the inspection appointment, the ALC guidance printed with its logo so even a person in a hurry would respect it. In suppliers, I filed copies of the emails I sent to our flour, jar, and label vendors. As of today, only purchase orders and deliveries authorized by Evelyn Hart are valid. 2 signatures for orders over $300. Please update your contact records. Thank you for supporting local farms in ways that keep them alive. In communications, I printed the Save the Date posts for Jade's showcase, the sponsorship deck, and the emails I wrote asking for contracts. Under each, I wrote the date and one sentence in pencil. No signed agreement. Then I wrote 3 registered letters, because paper becomes serious when it gets its own tracking number. One to the beverage sponsor. No event or brand activation is permitted on Harts Lane Market property without a site agreement signed by me as owner, proof of insurance naming us as additional insured, and a safety plan approved by Fraser Health. Absent these, any on-site activity will be considered trespass and misrepresentation. One to the wedding planner. Our farm is within the ALR. Weddings are not an allowable agritourism use without ALC approval. No bookings will be honored. Remove our name from your materials. One to Jade and Owen together. Effective immediately, changes to operations require 2 signatures. Mine and one other approved signatory. Complimentary use of property is suspended. Supplemental card charges unrelated to operations must be repaid per the attached schedule. Please confirm in writing that you have read and will comply. I walked those letters to the post office, paid for registered mail, and watched the clerk stamp each envelope like an old priest, deliberate, kind, unamused by Sin. It turned out Sin had rented a fog machine. The next morning, while I was logging cooler temperatures, Jade arrived carrying a crate of stemless glasses and stadium-grade confidence. "We got a brand partner to send product," she said. "We should prep the tasting station." I met her in the middle. I have learned that winning is not always the same as being right. We have a health inspection scheduled next Thursday, I said, handing her the appointment printout. Any tasting must be done in the designated area with allergen signs. No open pouring, and I pointed to the ALC sheet. No wedding showcase. Photography tours during opening hours only. No bar, no amplified sound, no fog. She smiled like a person determined to pass a driving test on charm. We can finesse, she said. Finesse is for pastry, I said. This is law. Owen hovered in the doorway, torn between a wife's excitement and a mother's affidavit. Mom, he tried, and I cut him the generosity I hoped someone would cut me if I lost my way in a sentence. I'm not stopping pictures, I said. I am stopping events. I'm also stopping purchases on the card that don't belong to the farm. We'll talk repayment tonight. He looked at the floor like it remembered a boy version of him, who believed floors were just somewhere to dump hockey gear. Okay, he said. In the chef's knife voice a man saves for when he has to cut his own idea off his plate. Okay. In the afternoon, the bank called and confirmed the controls. New credentials, dual signature threshold set, alerts in place. I wrote the time and the name of the person who called in the margin of my paper letter because memory can be generous and untrustworthy in the same hour. The insurer's email went out to the sponsor and planner. I CC'd Jade and Owen. Both replies came back fast and full of words that move like smoke. Activation, brand alignment, community. The planner added, looking forward to celebrating love on the farm. I replied with one sentence and a PDF attachment. Please see attached ALC guidance indicating weddings are not an allowable agri-tourism use. No bookings. I did not use an exclamation mark. Punctuation is for friends. The next days behaved like days always do when paperwork is multiplying. Half errands, half the same chores that keep you from becoming a person who thinks emails are action. I checked the drip lines at dawn and repaired a crack in the end cap of row 7 with a piece of tape that had survived wars. I ran the sanitizer test and logged the cooler. I drove to our label supplier and picked up the next roll because running out of labels is like running out of patience in front of a stranger. Preventable. I trained the new summer kid on the hand wash ritual. Water on, soap, 20 seconds the length of a short song, paper towels, turn off with your wrist. He rolled his eyes and then did it. I stacked empty flats for the weekend and cleaned the measuring scoops like a person preparing for an inspector who is having a good day and is therefore extra fussy. Jade kept posting the countdown for the showcase, perhaps imagining policy would bend under traffic. I posted the you pick hours, the safety rules, and a photo of my hand on a ripeness cluster with the caption, "We grow food. Come pick." Several people messaged to ask if we would host a proposal shot at sunset. I replied to each with the same line. We're not a venue, we're a farm, and we'd be honored to be your background while you buy berries. Honored means what it says here. On Wednesday night, after the stand closed and the cooler stopped arguing, I sat with Owen at the kitchen table. Bright overhead light that makes lies crueler than usual. 2 mugs of tea understeeped, because we needed our hands to hold something. I slid the card statement toward him with the blue dots I had put next to the non-farm charges. Fog machine, arch, glassware, digital ad package. This much, I said, tapping the total I'd rewritten in my blunt pencil. Over 8 weeks. Here's the schedule. I handed him the repayment plan, a manageable monthly amount, lower if he picked up 2 extra days helping Rita during harvest. Higher if he didn't. It's not a punishment, I said. It's a math problem. He rubbed his eyes with his knuckle the way he did when he was 5 and sorry for something he hadn't meant. I didn't want you to have to carry all this, he said. Then don't, I said, and tried to soften the sentence with a hand on his arm. He nodded. I'll tell Jade, he said. I let him have that, even though I had already told the registered letter his voice would be late. Thursday's inspection arrived right on time. Marla walked the wash area with her clipboard and a pen that asked for facts. We checked the sanitizer, the probe thermometer, the hand wash station, the storage for the wooden crates. She noted the new allergen sign I had posted near the pass. Nuts used in kitchen. Please inform us of allergies. She asked about sampling, and I showed her the tray and the plan. You'll be fine, she said, and wrote her neat initials exactly where a good woman hopes to see someone else's name. Before she left, I asked a favor I imagined she had granted other mothers. Can you put in your note, I said, that any tasting or sampling must be done in the designated area, with no alcohol service and no pop-up bar? She smiled like a person who loves clarity. Yes, she said, and wrote it in. Precise. Friday morning brought emails that smelled like panic hidden under perfume. The beverage sponsor replied to Denise's request for insurance with a PDF that named themselves and Jade's new brand, but forgot the farm. Denise replied politely, please reissue naming Hart's Lane Market and Evelyn Hart as additional insured. Event will not proceed without. The wedding planner wrote, our clients are expecting a showcase. I wrote, our regulators are expecting compliance. The planner switched to phone. I listened to a 5-minute speech about communities evolving and Instagrammable moments. I said, the ALC doesn't evolve on Saturdays. We ended without enemies because I hung up before she had to choose between being unkind and being useful. By midday, I had sent a notice to our email list. 1,000 addresses gathered one honest transaction at a time. We're a farm, I wrote. We pick, wash, weigh, and sell. We're open 8 to 4. Saturday, we're offering guided rows for photos during those hours. No bars, no events. Bring shoes that forgive mud. Leave with berries. Within an hour, a dozen replies came back. Bless you for staying a farm, one said. Please don't change, said another, and one from a school teacher. We tell our kids about food systems. Thanks for being one. I printed that one and pinned it above the desk with Bill's photo because praise ages differently when it sits near a man who knew toys didn't run on applause. Late afternoon, Jade appeared in the doorway of the office with a look that said she had been brave in front of someone who didn't know our winter, and now she needed a place where she could stop making her mouth into a shape that hurt. The sponsor says they can send cans, she said. Sealed. They can send them, I said, and we'll sell them next to the jam when your paperwork is right. The planner says their lawyer thinks the ALC wording leaves room, she said. Then their lawyer can apply for a non-farm use, I said. Until then, room is not on this property. You're making me look small, she said, and I didn't smile because I remembered being 31, and the way 31 makes you think size is something anyone else controls. I'm making us look legal, I said. If you want big, build a plan the law can hold. She cried then, without wanting to, a short burst like a pipe that needed tightening. I handed her a towel because this is still a kitchen. I'm not your enemy, I said, but I won't be your mascot. The night before the showcase, I set the stand the way I like to see it at dawn. Floor mopped, crates stacked, chalkboard clean, change float counted and wrapped in paper bands, labeled with the date. I printed the email from Denise and the inspection note from Marla and put them in the front sleeve of the red folder. I set the ALC guidance beside them. I prepared a small plain sign to tape by the register in the morning. Today, photography welcome during open hours 8 to 4. No events, no bar service, no amplified sound. All our rules. Tasting samples served at pass only. Thank you for respecting the farm. Then I went to the field and stood in row 12 where the arch had been stored. I lifted it with Owen and carried it to the shed. It wasn't heavy. It pretended to be. We closed the shed door. We didn't lock it because we don't treat props like they're plotting. We treat people like they should choose better. Should. I slept like a person who had left work to hold her place in the dark. Saturday came up clean and blue, the kind of morning that makes a city person decide farming is a mood. I opened at 8. People arrived with cameras and hats and shoes that would be sorry by noon. I sold flats, weighed jam, wrote receipts. I taped the sign by the register. At 10:30, 2 women with lanyards approached the pass, carrying clipboards. They introduced themselves as Fraser Health, doing the routine inspection I had booked, on their way to another farm after lunch. They walked the area, nodded at the sanitizer, pointed to my tasting tray, and made a note under the line that says, "Dedicated sampling only." "Everything's in order," one said, and I felt my throat let go of something it had held in its teeth all week. She signed the sheet. I taped the copy where eyes could find it without me waving. At 11, the wedding planner arrived with a smile that could serve cocktails. She glanced at the posted sign, at the inspection sheet, at the ALC printout pinned to the corkboard with 2 tacks as if temptation had fingers. "We can still do a walkthrough," she said, breathy. "You can walk," I said. "You cannot plan." The beverage rep showed up with a case of cans and a camera boy who kept pointing at corners like light owed him angles. Denise's email arrived on my phone at that moment with the subject line, "No certificate received, no coverage." I showed it to the rep. He swallowed. "We can circle back," he said, inventing a loop out of his mouth. "You can buy jam," I said. He did, with the air of someone who knows a pivot when he tastes one. Jade hovered near the scale, paler than filtered light. She started to lift the temporary banner. I touched her wrist and shook my head gently. She let it drop. Owen stacked crates and pretended that the task had always been spiritual. Around noon, a reporter from the local paper appeared, the same woman who had photographed my hands last summer. She took one picture of the inspection notice and one of the old wooden sign peeking out from under the banner's edge, then asked if she could quote me. "We chose being a farm over being a venue," I said. "The rules help us keep that promise." She nodded like she had memorized a comprehensible world and didn't want to forget. By afternoon, the showcase had been downgraded by reality to what it should have been all along, a busier day at a farm stand. Couples took pictures between rows, children stained their mouths a sublime purple, and learned the price of rinsing under a cold tap. The planner retreated to her car to make calls with the air-conditioned voice of a woman reselling a different dream to the same client. The beverage rep left with receipts and a fragile respect for permits. Jade held the tasting tray and offered people a quarter of a shortbread square with the concentration of someone who had just discovered service is not a synonym. It is a posture. When we closed, I swept and Owen mopped, and Jade counted the till under my supervision like a person learning the language she had mocked. Then we sat in the office together, me, my son, my daughter-in-law, this red folder between us like the small, honest animal that had carried the day. I didn't read a speech. I didn't scold. I slid 3 documents across the desk. First, the resolution for 2 signatures on contracts, orders, and transfers above $300. "This is not to make you small," I said to Jade. "It's to make us steady." She signed. Owen signed. I signed last because I like to watch people choosing the world they intend to live in. Second, the revocation of unauthorized access, vendor accounts, banking, bookings. "If you want back in," I said, "we'll do a training with the bookkeeper and the banker. You'll pass a little test I'll make with questions like, what does the hand wash sink do? And what does ALR stand for?" She almost smiled. "I can pass tests," she said. "Me too," I said. We shook hands the way you do when you want touch to mean something. Third, the repayment schedule. Owen took it like a man choosing a tool, not a sentence. "I'll do it," he said. "I believe you," I answered, and in that moment, I did. You can end a day like that with a triumphant sentence if you're writing fiction. You can end it with a sunset if you disrespect how weather loves its own mind. I ended it by cleaning the hand wash sink and turning off the cooler light, because bulbs cost money, and I am the person who pays the bill. I went out to the porch and sat where the wood knows my shape. The field settled into its evening noises, the new leaves doing their tiny photosynthesis prayer, the pump finally quiet, a neighbor's laughter carried wrong by the wind. Jade came to the door with her phone in her pocket, which is how I know she had decided to stay human. She said, "I thought making something beautiful would be enough." I said, "It's a good start. The rules let beautiful stick around." There's one more thing that happens before I call this chapter finished. I emailed our customers again. "Thanks for a busy, lawful day," I wrote. We'll keep showing you food with names we can pronounce and permits we can post. Photography, welcome. No weddings, bring a hat, leave with berries. I went to bed with my boots lined up and the red folder beside them like a well-trained dog. Not because I mistrusted the night, but because tomorrow morning would ask me to prove again that I meant what I had just said. Next time you hear from me, there'll be a public thing. Nothing as grand as a showcase, grand enough for witnesses. The planner will come because contracts need their ghosts to say sorry in front of rooms. The sponsor's email will arrive, late and well-behaved. Jade will stand beside me for the kind of announcement that tastes like bread. Simple, sustaining, made of things our hands can measure. And if anyone tries to lift a banner without the weight of a signature, the wind will do what it always does here. Tell on them. Some endings don't bang the door, they set the latch. On a farm, you learn to prefer that kind of finish. The work that saves you, gauges, permits, log sheets, doesn't need to make noise to be true. After the Saturday that refused to turn into a wedding showcase, I could have called it done. The sponsor had packed their cans. The planner had retreated into air conditioning and euphemism, and we had sold berries instead of pretending we were a venue, but loose ends trip ankles. I wanted something more deliberate than a day that happened to break my way. I wanted a room, a table, and witnesses. I wanted to turn temporary into policy and pride into a printed page that could be taped to a wall and pointed at by a tired person who deserved to be believed. We set the date for a Tuesday evening when the field was quiet, the sky inclined to honesty, and the neighbors not yet in their hay. I called it a community update because apology scares people who should attend. The notice on our board read, Hearts Lane Market, Operations and Policy Update. 6 p.m. in the pack house, coffee and shortbread, no amplified sound. I printed 12 copies and posted one at the feed store, one at the post office, and one at Rita's. Rita added a yellow sticky with her particular mercy. Come early for a seat. Chairs aren't new. I spent the morning the way I spend every morning, washing the hand basin, logging the cooler temperature, writing a neat 3 under the column that means sanitizer concentration passed. I checked the drip lines and tightened a fitting in row 5, listening for the soft staccato that says water is choosing duty again. I stacked chairs in the pack house and swept twice because meetings deserve clean floors. I set a pot to drip into a thermos and laid paper cups in tidy 5s. When you mean to deliver a hard sentence, every small kindness before it counts as scaffolding. At 5:30, I took the red folder and set it in the middle of the table like a well-behaved animal. Owen came in carrying an extra table under his arm and the look of a man who has decided to be useful where drama would flatter him more. Jade followed with her hair up and her phone in her pocket, which is how I know she was planning to be present instead of perform. Rita arrived early with a plate of cheese and the sort of face that steadies a crowd without telling it what to do. The Fraser health inspector, Marla, wasn't required to come and didn't, but she had sent an email that morning allowing me to quote her note from the inspection. Sampling must occur at the designated pass with hand wash access. No alcohol service. Denise, our broker, sent a polite line. Coverage remains as declared. No event coverage without written owner approval and valid certificates naming Hart's Lane Market and Evelyn Hart. I printed both. By 6, 15 people had gathered. Neighbors, 2 customers who have turned into friends, the counselor who wipes his own table after a sandwich like his mother taught him, the reporter from the paper, and the planner, who surprised me by coming in person and not sending a junior with a clipboard and a jacket that hopes to be invited to a microphone. The beverage rep appeared late, carrying a notebook and the embarrassment of someone who has learned a new rule the public way. I didn't stand on a crate. I sat at the table, placed one palm on the red folder because I'm old-fashioned about touch, and began in the low-voice kitchen's teach for when the roast is ready and the children are at play. "Thank you for coming," I said. "We're a farm." That seems obvious until it isn't. Saturday reminded me that stating the obvious out loud is part of my job. I laid the business registration in the open. "My name is on this," I said, not as a boast, but as a map. I set the property title beside it, the ALR stamp visible. Our land is in the Agricultural Land Reserve. The ALC has rules that keep soil honest. Weddings are not an allowable agri-tourism use without a non-farm permit. I slid the printed ALC guidance near the edge so the planner could read without craning. Photography during open hours is incidental use, I added. We welcome it. It will never turn us into a venue. I placed the Fraser Health Inspection report on top of the old one, 2 signatures, 2 dates, like a woman stacking evidence until weight persuades. Sampling happens here, I said, tapping the pass, with hand wash, with allergen signage, no pop-up bars, no fog. The insurance declarations came next, the line Denise had underlined visible even to eyes trained for denial. Coverage remains in force for farm operations as declared, I read. No extension to events without owner approval and certificates naming the farm. Absent those, coverage does not exist. I let the words sit a minute. Silence is a seasoning when the room respects the recipe. Then I put down the resolution for 2 signatures and the revocation of unauthorized access. We are adopting measures that make us harder to harm, I said. Orders over 300 require 2 signatures. No complimentary use of property without written authorization. No bookings without a contract that respects ALR rules, insurance, and the health permit. Banking is locked to those conditions. I looked at Owen and Jade then because son and daughter-in-law deserve sentences that include their names even when the sentence is offense. They've signed these measures, I said. We're moving forward as a family that intends to survive itself. I could have stopped there. It was enough for the paper, enough for the planner to call her client and translate into the language of invoices. But I had one more page in me, and it belonged to the room. I have a ledger, I said, where I keep numbers. I also keep names there, and I write what they did when it mattered. I lifted the food bank letter and set it beside the ledger page where I had written our donations during the year that frightened us all in a way we pretend we don't remember now. We gave when we had more than we could sell. That is part of being a farm. So is saying no when glamour arrives without a permit. The planner raised her hand like a student who has decided to pass the exam after all. May I? She asked. I nodded. She stood and spoke in a tone that told me she had been spoken to since Saturday by people she respects. We misunderstood the scope of what was possible on ALR land, she said. We've removed Hart's Lane from our materials. We're sorry for the pressure we applied. We're reminded that pretty doesn't excuse illegal. She sat quickly, which is the safest way to share humility before it starves. The beverage rep followed, holding his notebook like a passport. We tried to rush coverage, he said. Denise was clear. We will resubmit a retail partnership proposal for packaged product. No on-site activation, if that suits. I said, send it. We'll put your cans next to jam if the label lists ingredients a grandmother can say. He smiled, relieved to be back in a world where grandmother is a standard, not a demographic. The counselor asked the question rooms like this eventually hatch. What about the name? The banner? I set the old wooden sign on the table, the one Bill and I carved and painted and sanded into more patience than fashion. The name is Hart's Lane Market, I said. The brand is soil. The banner will come down. If you see it again, it'll be as a tea towel we sell to tourists who know they're buying a joke. We signed the policy notice in front of everyone. Me, Owen, Jade. 3 names that will keep each other honest when tiredness wants shortcuts. I taped a copy to the corkboard and another to the inside of the office door. I handed a third to the reporter because a paper loves something that can be photographed without misquoting. And then, because I am old and I believe in stomachs as places where ideas live longer, I poured coffee and passed around shortbread. People stayed to talk in the way small towns do. Names for who needs a mechanic, condolences folded into questions about weather, offers to lend chairs for the school fundraiser in July. That's what I wanted the night for. Not drama, dignity. After people left, we cleaned. Owen stacked chairs 2 at a time, no noise. Jade washed cups without breaking a single thing. When the last one squeaked under a towel, she stood with the towel in her hands like a flag that had decided to retire. "I wanted the farm to feel like an occasion," she said, the voice of a woman learning a distinction that will save her life. Feeling versus fact. "It is an occasion," I said. "It's just daily." We went out to the porch. The field sat with us, the bushes good company in their refusal to praise. We let the quiet tell us we had not ruined anything beyond repair. A bat stitched the sky. The pump rested. The house leaned the right way. You asked me to add a comment at the end in my own voice and not hide the feeling because I prefer paper. Here it is. My daughter-in-law told me, in her way, that I didn't matter. That sting will never be my favorite part of this year, but I don't believe in chasing anyone across a field shouting my value. If I make myself impossible to ignore, it will be because the inspection is posted, the insurance terms are signed, the bank can't move my money without a second pen, and the ALC's sentence sits on the corkboard beside the recipe for molasses cake. I don't want to be a martyr to tradition. I want to be a woman whose name is on the title because she keeps promises to dirt. You might think what I did was revenge. Maybe it reads that way if you crave spectacles. What it felt like to me was maintenance. Mothers are custodians of the boring parts that stop houses from catching fire. We teach children to wear a hat. We put a label on the jar. We show the young ones where the binder lives and which tab means the thing you're about to do is smarter if you've read it first. I didn't humiliate Jade in front of people she needed to impress. I sat her at a table in the light and handed her the rest of her life. Respect the rules and your pretty will last here. Ignore them and you'll be left selling adjectives with nowhere to stand. Owen will repay what he charged. He's picked up 2 harvest days at Rita's. I saw him hand her a repayment envelope yesterday with the calm posture of a man who isn't trying to be applauded while fixing what he dented. Jade and I wrote a simple service contract. Hourly, specific, no decision rights, and I will pay it gladly if she proves she can tell truth and sell jam in the same breath. The sponsor sent a new proposal for packaged drinks, ingredients short and familiar. Denise approved the certificate. The cans sit now beside the freezer with the modest pride of things that came into the room properly. The planner emailed a thorough apology and a note about updating her website's farm venues page to farm visits. Small victory, large peace. Last thing, I registered our business name properly, including a little trademark protection. Not because I'm litigious, but because my husband once told me, a name isn't love unless you keep it fed. The old wooden sign is back on the road, paint a little nicked. Letters still legible to anyone driving slow enough to earn berries. Under it, I hung a smaller board, hand-lettered, nothing fancy. We're a farm. You pick hours, 8 to 4. Photos welcome during open hours. No weddings, no bars. Wash your hands, pay your bill, thank you. People chuckle when they read it. Then they take a basket and do the one public act I never get tired of watching. Choosing their fruit like a promise. If this story made something settle in you, if it reminded you that boundaries are just love written legibly, tell me. Like this, if it gave you a way to keep your name where your work lives. Subscribe if you want more stories from kitchens and fields where receipts and recipes outlast slogans. And comment, have you ever had to turn a messy brand idea into lawful, livable rules? What paper did you post? Who signed? And how did the room change afterward? If it helped, share it with someone standing under a banner that doesn't match their permit and invite them to borrow my red folder for courage. There will be another story when the dew lifts and the pump remembers its job. I'll be here, in boots, with the binder open, doing the daily occasion.